Mountain climbing has a lot of history, and most of it has just kind of happened, big-time mountain climbing, since people in this room can remember. If you think about it, it was only 1953 that Mount Everest was climbed for the first time. It had been attempted a couple times in the 20s, and some of us can remember when Edmund Hillary made that first ascent of Everest. And then, not long after that, came along the Whittaker brothers, and a lot of us can remember them. They were really pioneers in climbing in the United States, and this is their bailiwick right here. They trained on Mount Rainier, and basically, right on up to nowadays, Mount Rainier and our area is the climbing training area for many major climbs throughout the world. Jim Whittaker was really active as recently as 1990 when he did a peace climb. And he brought in people from China and Russia and the United States and organized this 30 climbers to all climb Mount Everest at one time. And it was quite an event at that time in the mountaineering community for our state. They had these 30 climbers. The Mountaineers in Seattle hosted them, and the climbing community got to meet these 30 climbers. And when they went up there in May of 1990, at that time, it was the largest group summit of Mount Everest ever, and there's 20 of them out of the 30 that made the summit. And they trained on Mount Rainier. They took all of them and just started them out with the basic stuff and just kept going on to the advanced stuff. You'll see here that as we go through this, that our state has all kinds of climbing for anybody, as tough as you want to be. You don't have to fly to France or any other continent to get into as tough a climbing as you want. It's all here, basically within driving distance of where we're sitting right here tonight. I'll start off here with some of these early images of Mount Baker. And this isn't Mount Baker. This is actually a group going up Unicorn Peak, which is south of Mount Baker, in 1905. And that's really early mountaineering. As you can see, they got the old alpenstocks, and they're all in a line. No helmets. The guy in the short sleeves with his on the snow, and heaven forbid the first couple guys fall. There's no ropes or anything like that. It's kind of scary climbing. This figure, I shudder every time I look at this one. This was on Goat Peak, near Glacier Peak, in 1906. These guys were curious about what was going on in that crevasse. And I certainly don't see anybody anchored or roped or helmet. I mean, my gosh, that whole sheet could just break off and all 8 of them go in there, or 6 of them, I guess. It's just quite amazing. I mean, that takes guts. I mean, I was always a chicken when I was climbing myself. This is on Mount Baker, 1906, and this is pretty exposed climbing. There's only 2 of them on that rope, and that's scary. Usually mountaineers like to have 3, 2 people to catch the fallen person if they go into a crevasse or over the edge. But people were just learning safety in climbing in those days, and that's why I was always really thankful about the Mountaineers program. They start you out, you kind of start out at a very low level, and they teach you all of the safety steps that have been developed through the years. And they've published this book, Freedom of the Hills, that every beginning climber will purchase. And it's gone from a book about, maybe 200 pages to about 500 pages in the last 40 or 50 years. I think it's in about the 6th or 8th edition now. And this is on the top of Mount Shuksan. And this was interesting. This was an overnight trip on Mount Shuksan. It's interesting to see what he's doing up there. He's building a cairn, a rock cairn. So in 1906, that was a pretty big deal to get up there on top of Mount Shuksan, and you know, he wanted everybody to know they'd been there, and by golly, that's what they did. Nowadays, people just kind of sit up there and have lunch or get down in a hurry as fast as they can. It's a lot of traffic up there. This is an interesting one from Goat Peak's Wilderness in 1906. Notice the horses on the snow? I mean, my gosh. And that's, I can't tell if that's a snow or a glacier, but, you know, never tried to rescue a horse off of a glacier or out of a crevasse, and I'm sure that those folks didn't have the technique either. These photos are from the Tahoma City Library, and they're in the northwest room. That's where these came from. I have silver hair, but I wasn't around to take these. This is an interesting picture of the 1908 Mountaineers scouting party up on top of Mount Baker. And obviously they're quite proud of that. They are all posed there, and they've got their 46-star flag flying, and that's a pretty big deal. I've never climbed with anybody that ever carried a flag to the top, you know, around here. Or in our state, it's just so commonplace. But back then, this was one of the early ascents of Mount Baker. Not the first, but an early one. Possibly one of the very first ones with a camera. This is a picture taken on Boulder Glacier in Mount Baker in 1908. And again, you see this phenomena of a lot of people on the glacier all in a row. And they hadn't developed their climbing skills enough yet to realize that, hey, that puts a lot of weight on a glacier so that the ice can break and they could all fall through. It could be quite disastrous. This picture here is an early picture of Mount Baker. And again, it's a large, long team going. And you'll see some more evidence of that a little bit later in some of these other slides. Again, your big, long assault. We used to call those assaults of the mountain. Nowadays, climbers and climbing groups are limited to a maximum of 12, not only for the environment, but for the safety. And typically, you'll have a group of 4 groups of 3 people and 1 team leader on each rope team. So you'll basically have 1 pretty experienced person on the rope team and 2 lesser experienced. So, but that definitely wasn't happening there. And again, here they are on the glacier. Again, this fellow, if you take a look at him, he's just way too close to the point of that glacier. That thing could just break off in a heartbeat. And there's nobody around. I mean, there's no rope, nothing. You know, he'd just be gone. This is a photo of Anshel Curtis in 1906 on the summit of Mount Baker. Kind of a nice solo picture. Yeah. These photos may have been colorized a little bit through the years. I'm not sure what the history on them are. There they are again. This one here, I noticed there was a lady here that wrote a book on early women climbers, and you might even know this person's name, but she's in a skirt, and that's the way women climbed, in the skirts back there in those days. That was what they did. That was on Mount Rainier. This fella here, that's Fred Beckey. I don't know, has anybody in this group heard of Fred Beckey or no? Yeah, okay, well he's the dean of mountain climbing in our state, and he did more first ascents and has done more peaks than anybody around. And this is a picture of him 2 years ago at the University of Washington in Tacoma, and he was presenting a slideshow of his photos to the campus. And it was really interesting. With a twinkle in his eye, he would say, yeah, we didn't quite get to the summit that day, but I'm going to try to go back and get that one, you know. He's quite a guy. This is the South Twin Sister. And of course you'll recognize Mount Baker. And this was on a mountain rescue climb, a training climb. That was what was really fun. Any mountain rescue slides obviously were taken during practices or training. I didn't ever have my camera on a rescue. I mean, there's no time for that. That's a little bit closer look, and that was a fun climb. It's get to see Mount Baker really up close and personal there. These are two peaks that you never see from the highway or even on some casual hikes and climbs that are very significant that aren't on everybody's vocabulary. This is American Border Peak. This is about 2 miles south of the Canadian border. And not too many people climb that peak. That's really tough to get to. And there's a lot of rockfall on it, and sometimes people have asked me, well, what's the toughest climb you've ever done? And that was one of the toughest to even get to, and got turned back 3 times on that one just because of the rockfall, and you couldn't find the route, and it's very difficult. Very few people have been there. This is during the winter. You can see it certainly has a lot of differences of personality when you want to go. You'd never attempt this in the winter. This might not be recognizable because most people have never seen it from this angle. This is Mount Shuksan. This is the summit block of Mount Shuksan right there. One of the other really interesting climbs that a person could attempt is the Nooksack Tower right there. And that's one of the most significant. It's almost 8,000 feet. In the North Cascades there. This was taken on the way to Ruth Mountain towards Hannigan Pass. This is Mount Baker, again from a different little angle that typically you don't see unless you're on your way up to Ruth Mountain or camping at Ruth Mountain, kind of silhouetted through there. This is the beginning of Ruth Mountain. This is one of the nicest little climbs you could ever do. It's a lot of people wouldn't call it a climb, but the scenery is just unbelievable. And on your way up to Ruth Mountain, you'll always go by a few of these guys. These are always fun. They aren't too scared of people either. They just kind of whistle at you, and they're hoping that they'll toss you a crumb. This is Ruth Mountain, and on a nice day, you can just kind of wander on up that thing and go right on up there and look at the North Cascades. A person has to be really careful not to assume that just because this is a low and level and easy appearing peak that you don't have all of the dangers of the crevasses and falling into a snowshoot, or that the weather changes. You have to have all of the respect for a mountain as easy as this one as you do for any of the others in the North Cascades. This is looking into the North Cascades, and that's the Sawtooth Ridge there that more serious climbers than I am would have ever gone back into. That's where you get into the sheer rock faces and all that kind of stuff, and that's not too many people ever go back into there unless they're trying to prove something to themselves. But it's all there for any degree of climbing that a person would ever want to experience. There's Mount Shuksan again from a different angle and a different season. This is the Nooksack Cirque, and you can see all this glacier stuff coming down from there. I have a few pictures in my book of Nooksack Cirque. I just didn't have enough time, or you guys wouldn't want to sit through 200 slides, I'm sure. But I often wonder right now if it's how much of it is still there, because this was taken probably in about 1975 at the head of the Nooksack River. It's the Nooksack Cirque. Yep, that's a hanging glacier. The scary part of it was that you can hear that ice falling all the time. Not a place you wanted to camp below or stay at very long. That's for sure. That's another picture of Mount Baker on the way to Ruth Mountain. This is a picture of Lynn Dayton. He's still presently active in the mountain rescue group here in Bellingham, and that was taken about 30 years ago. Take you on a little picture, or kind of a little trip up Mount Baker. This is kind of, you'll hike into the Culchin cabin and get up there on the Coleman Glacier and camp overnight. And that's kind of what it looks like in the morning, pretty much after you've had your first cup of coffee and got your boots on and got your camera warmed up. And you start kind of going up the glaciers. This would be up the Coleman Glacier. If you've heard the expression, the Roman wall, this is where it is. Well, we're going to end up going clear around and back and on up that from a different angle. And of course, you have to be careful of the crevasses and everything all the way up. And that's just ice that's moving. It's not going to stop moving just because there's a few climbers walking around. You got to keep your eyes open all the time. Sometimes if it snowed recently, these can be just snowed over and people can just fall right in those things. And that's why typically in a safe environment, you're always going to have 3 climbers and hopefully 2 rope teams, one to rescue the other rope team if you get in real bad trouble. That's just working your way on up. There's our group all spread out, so there's not too much weight all in one spot because you're on the glacier there. These are the Coleman Pinnacles, and those are the 2 kind of sharp little peaks that you see off to the side and to the right of Mount Baker. We could smell sulfur as we were going up there. There's no doubt in any mountaineer's mind that's ever been up there that Mount Baker's an active volcano. It's you can smell that sulfur. And that's just kind of a view, kind of a clouded out view in there. Another one of the pinnacles. Yeah, that'd be Baker Lake, yeah. Yeah, it'd be Baker Lake. Yep. Starting to get to the top now. We're all tired. We've come up the Roman wall. And we're just about there. And there's what the summit looks like. It's very nice and flat and very accommodating. It's can hold about 50 or 100 people up there. And that's some of the views that you're treated to. If you're tired of snow a little bit, we'll go over to eastern Washington. And this is kind of an interesting peak. A lot of people don't consider it, or maybe never even heard of it or thought of it as being a mountain climb, but it's Mountstuart. And it's over near Ellensburg. It's on the other side of Snoqualmie Pass. Again, this is Mountstuart with some of the lower, this is lower Stewart in this area in here. That a lot of people can kind of climb for warming up on that. And again, that's the West Ridge that you're looking at. This is one of my favorite pictures of Mount Rainier in the background. It's about 70 miles away, and Earl Wiley there, he's one of the instructors in the Mountaineers standing on the very summit of Mountstuart. And it's really kind of cool because in going through the program, Earl Wiley was, one of the older guys. I was probably, in my 30s, and he was about 50. And we thought, God, this guy's got steel legs of iron. He just goes up all these mountains and all that. And as we got to know him, well, he was a lineman for the city of Seattle. And a lot of his work was just going up and down telephone poles, repairing the lines. And he's really quite a guy. He lives in Indianola, and he's still very active. I mean, and Wiley was his name, and he was Wiley. He was in excellent shape. This is an often forgotten peak of one of the 6 majors in Washington. This is Glacier Peak. And after you've tramped into the woods for a good part of a day and you're getting ready to start out, well, that's kind of what it would look like. And you're not going to put on your boots and crampons for a long time. This is probably one of the least climbed of the 6 majors just because it's so darn hard to get to. There's no road there anywhere near that thing. And then finally, you get to what they call the Glacier Peak Wilderness Area, or Mount Baker National Forest. They actually have a sign telling you where you're going. Well, we all knew. But, and it is a volcanic peak, not a real active one, and you're not going to smell any sulfur, at least we didn't 25 years ago. But some people will debate once in a while whether it's a volcanic peak or not, but it is. Getting a little bit closer to it. And again, you know, you've got the snow figures and everything that way that are quite dangerous. That's kind of looking down. Once you get on top of the summit, you can kind of look down and see some of these other formations, and that's always quite interesting. We're getting there, just about there on top now. These are Gore-Tex jackets. Those are pretty good for rain and wind and pretty good weather. You'd wear those outside of your down parka. Getting to the summit's only half of the trip, too. A lot of people, they say, wow, you made it to the summit. Wow, we got there now. But the hard part is actually getting down, because after you've gotten to the top, you're tired. And by then it's the afternoon, the snow is softer, and those snow bridges over the crevasses that you walked over that you didn't even know about possibly on the way up, well, those have softened, and you can fall in those a lot easier. They might be thinner and not bear so much weight. And so that's a real beginner's mistake, and one of the first things that I teach in the Mountaineers is that getting to the top, that's only the half. That's the easy half of the trip. Particularly if you're in a hurry to get home and it's starting getting dark, or the weather changes. You start out and it's really nice. And you'll notice all of these pictures, the weather was pretty darn nice. Well, you know, there were times you didn't pull your camera out of your bag or you left it home, you know, too. This is what was waiting on top of Glacier Peak for us. This is a Mazama's summit register. And on quite a few summits, and I'm sure they still do it nowadays, but back then, this was 25 years ago, you'd find a register. If it wasn't buried by snow or somebody hadn't stolen it, or it was a very common peak. But people would all sign that and put it back in there. The Mazamas were, and that's a climbing group out of Portland, were probably more pioneers up here in the climbing areas than the Mountaineers, the Seattle Mountaineers, or anybody else. What people would do after those registers were kind of filled up, and they weren't always a formal register, sometimes they were just a notebook. Well, they're actually in the archives at the University of Washington, and you can actually physically go down there, and if the register's been brought back and they've been able to preserve it, the actual register from Glacier Peak climbs in 1932, they'll be there in the original handwriting of the climbers that signed it. Not to say that it's a total documentation, but it's there, the ones that they have been able to get. That's kind of an interesting phenomenon. The common climbs, and I call Mount Rainier and Mount Baker and Shuksan and these, they're pretty common climbs. You're not going to see a register, but on some of these obscure peaks, let's go to Mount St Helens. This is one of the earlier climbs I was on with Mountaineers, very early 70s, and this was before the 12-minute limit group was put on. And this is basically an assault. They'd take a beginning class of Mountaineers because this was a pretty straightforward basic climb up Dog's Head, up St. Helens, without a lot of danger and everything. And what a climb leader used to do in those days, I mean, this is the honest to God's truth. It'd line people up, and they didn't have a lot of the organization that they do nowadays. And they needed to pick their rope leaders. Well, how do you know? I mean, you got this many people, and the climb leader, for God's sakes, he doesn't know them all and have their climbing records and know about them. Well, they'd look at the guy's boots. And if it looked like he'd been on a few trips, he was a rope leader. And also sometimes size was a rope leader. You usually wanted to have somebody of size to lead the rope. You didn't want to have the smallest person pulling two great big guys up the mountain. And so, but this is a true confession of Mountaineers that was the way in the early days. You'd look at the boots, and there wasn't necessarily any qualifications to be a rope leader. Not so today. This is a different trip, and this trip was, probably about 1975. And what you see here is Icicle Glacier. And that glacier is climbed about once a year. Not very often, and of course not ever anymore, but it was a challenging climb, as you'll kind of see here. It's not visible from where most of the climbers would go. There's another view of it. This is kind of on the east side of Mount St. Helens. And again, you've got this ice. And you look at ice like that, and you see it, and the Mountaineers Tail is the mountain will move, and you know darn well that ice is going to move at any time that it so chooses. It can melt. And there's a picture of Icicle Glacier looking down. You're kind of walking alongside of it, the lower parts of it. This is probably about where we bivouacked or stayed overnight. Sometimes my wife asks me why I can fall asleep at any time, and the expression is that, well, when you're mountain climbing, you can fall asleep on a pile of rocks. And I definitely know on this climb I went to sleep on a pile of rocks. The clouds are down below. It isn't looking up into the clouds, if that's a different perspective. This was kind of the crux of the climb, so to speak. And it was kind of scary. And going across that thing, because these are just broken up chunks of ice that if you don't get across them in time, or if they all of a sudden decided to melt, there you go. We always try to start the climbs as early as possible, first light, sometimes at night with the flashlights on, just so that the ice wouldn't have a chance to thaw out. We all made it across there in fine shape. And you'll notice everybody's all spread out. I mean, you don't see that phenomena that we did in these earlier slides of everybody kind of piling on and, well, we'll all go in one big group. There we made it through, kind of working our way up the mountain. Starting to head up to the top there. This is what's called a false summit. You can look at that and think, oh yeah, we're just about there. Well, no, guess again. And again, you start to think you're at the summit and you're not there yet. This is Mount Hood to the south from Mount St. Helens. It's Mount Rainier. You can identify it right there. You see little Tahoma right there. It's Mount Adams. It's always fun to be above the clouds. Always kind of felt like I was somewhere when you can look down on the clouds like that. And then after you've been up there a while, you glissade down. And that's kind of fun because you don't come back down the glacier, because by the time you've reached the summit, it's 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and that stuff is melted and soft, so you come down a snowfield. And we glissade down. And Mount St. Helens was known for one of the best, longest glissades down Dog's Head of them all. A lot of times we forget about Mount Olympus. And sometimes when people ask about the difficulty of any particular peak, well, this one you have to factor into the fact that it's 18 miles into just the base camp. And it's right up the Hoh River. And that's usually with your, full pack. You're going to stay probably 2 nights. Our trip, typically the Mountaineers trip was a 4-day trip. 2 days in, 1 day for the summit, and then 1 or 2 back out. It was always kind of frustrating to meet some real hotshots coming out that were going to do it on a 3-day weekend, but yeah, it can be done. Not necessarily safely, because from what I saw, the 3-dayer people didn't have the safety equipment that they should have. They were kind of shirking on some of the stuff that we always carry, like extra clothes and a lot of the other safety equipment. But here we are, we're on the glacier. This is after a bivouac and staying overnight. We're roping up. It's pretty early in the morning. And again, you're walking across these, it's a glacier, and with all kinds of crevasses on all sides. And basically, we haven't even really started to climb yet. This is some of the snowfields that we're heading up to. This isn't somebody else's trail, because at that time, there was very few people climbing up there. And this is just a ball of snow that melted and rolled down. That's not another party that's up there. This is getting pretty close to the summit. Everybody's roped up here, right on up to the top of the summit block, because by then you're pretty tired and you take a spill. Well, somebody's got to be able to retrieve you. There we are. We're all sitting there on the summit. Enough room up there. This would be in the days when they're about 12, This was a very popular climb, Mount Olympus. When the Mountaineers put up a notice that somebody's going to lead Mount Olympus, it fills up almost immediately. Glacier Peak, not necessarily. This is looking west, and that looks kind of enticing to walk to and to see and all that, but probably didn't really want to do that. We're heading down, and this is looking at the Blue Glacier that we came across earlier this morning, looking down on it, and it's pretty wide and pretty thick. I haven't seen it in 25 years. I don't know how far it goes anymore, but this is Mount Adams from the road, and this is really remote too. A lot of people dismiss or disregard Mount Adams just because, hey, there's no lodge, there's no paved road to it. It's really almost circumvented by a Indian reservation, and there's just no facilities there. Mount Adams Wilderness. It's just south of Mount Ranier. Quite often, Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, and Mount Adams used to get confused by people going up and down the highways. They'd be looking, they'd see a Glacier Peak, and and they'd think it was Mount Adams, and it might be Mount Rainier, or they'd see St. Helens. But this is what it looks like, starting out kind of from the morning. And it's mostly a scramble, call it a rock scramble. The route that we would go basically is going to be just right on up here, right on up there. They have what they call a lunch counter, and that's going to be right about there. That's where you stop and have lunch. That's about halfway. It's not a challenging climb. It's just a straightforward, we'd call it a slog. Although you have to have full respect because you're at elevations of up to about 12,000 feet, and the weather can change anytime. You can all of a sudden have a snowstorm in July, And so we come fully equipped. These backpacks are all filled with our survival gear and whatever we need to do to just bunk down and stay overnight. This is one long, hot slog up there, I'll tell you. And that's the sun is beating on you from the south. The particular day we went, it was really nice. This is a old lookout, and that was kind of fun to play around and look at, and kind of a break, kind of a second lunch spot. Yeah, we're just about coming over the top now. There we are. We're on the summit of Mount Adams. And again, this is a mountain that you climb that in those days there weren't very many people in there. Mountain climbing has changed a lot from the 70s when I was most active in it. You didn't need a reservation to go to these areas. Now, and I don't keep track of the reservation systems, but I think you have to, make a reservation to climb Mount Rainier, just like you have to book into the Best Western. Even St Helens, what's left of it, you have to have reservations for and wait for. This is the Goat Rocks Wilderness area that you're looking at there, that snowy area right in there. Looks pretty small and insignificant from Mount Adams, but it's a whole new wilderness area that most people don't even get into. It's got some very climbable peaks. Mount Rainier from Mount Adams. On another trip, and this isn't a climbing trip, but this is part of the mountaineering experience. The Mountaineers, we had a group that went around Mount Adams. And this took a week. And there's 12 of us, maybe there's 10 or 11, but anyway, we went around it, and this was really kind of cool. So this is seeing some views of Mount Adams that most people don't see. At this point, we're on, I believe, the Yakima Indian Reservation. This is Adams Glacier, and that's a very climbable glacier. People that like to, climb on the ice and the glaciers, well, they'll do that. It's not one of the standard or easy routes at all. There's a castle. That one I just couldn't resist throwing that in there just because the clouds formed right around Castle at that time when I took that picture. There's rock formations on the other side of Mount Adams. Looks like a backdrop from an old John Wayne movie or something like that. But so that was Mount Adams. Okay, well, that's a pretty common picture of Mount Rainier from the Paradise parking lot. There's another one. This is Little Tahoma off to the right. From Seattle, if you're looking at Mount Rainier, to the left-hand side, you see that rock outcropping, and that's what that is. This is Camp Muir. This is at the 10,000-foot level. This is where climbers will stay. It's a public place. Anybody can stay there anytime they want. This is what Camp Muir looked like 25 years ago. This was the luxury suite here. That's where the guide stayed. This was a $1 million toilet that was flown up and back and forth on a helicopter. And these were just kind of bunkhouses for the guides and their clients that the Rainier Mountaineering would be bringing with them. Not everybody climbed up to Camp Muir. True story, Jim Whitaker is, not Jim, but Lou Whitaker was in the helicopter. He was kind of in charge of the group that was on this trip, and he'd probably climbed it a few hundred times, and he didn't need to climb it with every group. And there's a lot of equipment that they would need to supply a lot of the groups with and everything with that. So true story, sometimes the climbers didn't always climb. That's about as high as a helicopter can go. of that type. You hear all the time, and of course there's helicopters used in mountain rescue. These kind of private helicopters are used up to about 10,000 feet. If you're going to be rescuing somebody higher than 10,000 feet, then you're going to need to talk to the Air Force or the Army and get one of their military Chinook choppers. And they'll be able to land right on top of Mount Rainier. They can do that. But this is just about to the extent where they go. This is Little Tahoma there, looking at it in all of its glory. It's a pretty rough rock scramble, a lot of loose rock on there, very dangerous. This is an instructor kind of reminding and going through some of the ropes and rescue techniques before our climb up to the top. This is Little Tahoma, a little bit after we've started our trip up to the top of Mount Rainier. And just looking down on it, I kind of lucked out and caught that in all of its glory there. This is Liberty Ridge on the back there, and then you can see Mount St Helens there through in the back. There you go again and see Mount St Helens in the back. Another close-up of Little Tahoma. And there we're working our way up the Coleman Glacier. This area here is commonly called Cadaver Gap. So when somebody has an accident up on the top of Mount Rainier and the mountain rescue units are bringing them down, that's the easiest and quickest way to bring them down, and so they've nicknamed that Cadaver Gap. This is the Tatoosh Range across from Mount Rainier with Mount Adams in the background. And there's a lot of real neat climbs there. You can just park in the Paradise parking lot and go on any kind of nice climb without having to have ropes and crampons and, just always be assured of being back to your car that night. I thought I'd throw a few pictures of training techniques that we use. This is just a common glissade practice or a ice axe arrest practice that any mountaineer group will do before your climbs. There's again, doing that again. Went on a lot of, this is Mount Erie with a rescue stretcher, a Stokes litter to haul somebody down the mountain. Image of carrying a person up a rock face, rescuing, simulated rescue. This is a hypothermia belt. Wrap that around a person, pump hot water in it, and hopefully it would warm them up. This is way out in the field where you'd use this. And you'd carry those with them if it was a possible hypothermia threat. That's just a couple of examples of some of the hardware and roping stuff that we did. So that's pretty much the slideshow that I have. I've had a lot of experience, or a lot of fun experiences in the mountains. Sometimes we forget that there are 95 peaks over 8,000 feet in our state, and that's a significant climb anywhere. And a lot of them, I was just kind of reviewing and looking over the list tonight, and I mean, some of them were names I'd never heard of. I mean, they're out there, and they're in the North Cascades, and they're all there for everybody. And so, if you know anybody or are interested in getting interested in mountaineering, hook up with the Mountaineers program. It's an excellent program. And they do everything from starting you out with a walk around Lake Padden, probably out here, to, they have guided trips up Mount Everest. And, incidentally, if you see anybody or talk to anybody that said they climbed Mount Everest this year or last year, they didn't. They didn't have anybody's summit on Mount Everest. As you may have heard, there was a great big ice fall in 2014, and they killed about 20 Sherpas. And now they're revamping the whole program because they were getting to the point where oh yeah, they wanted to get the blind guy up, they wanted to get the oldest person up, they wanted to get the, people with prosthetics up, or the youngest, and they're revamping the entire program. And start saving now. It is a guided tour. Just come up with about $50,000-$60,000, and you can make it up Everest probably, and more than that, they'll probably carry you up next year. Yeah.
You said something that made me think that you follow trails to do this. I'd always assumed you'd kind of go willy-nilly as you're hiking to what seems to be the best. How much of mountain climbing is following existing trails, and how much is deciding as you go?
Not a lot of it is deciding as you go, thanks to Fred Becky. That's the guy that was about 95 years old nowadays that I showed you. He did a lot of trail making, not making the trails, but he wrote what's called Becky's Bible, and he'd give you directions. The trails are all different. Now, like for Mount Olympus, it's an 18-mile trail into base camp. And then when you are at base camp on the edge of the glacier, then you're off the trail. Then it's willy-nilly. You do route finding around the crevasses and everything else. If you're climbing Mountstuart, well, you would drive. You basically probably kind of car camp at the end of the road, and then you'd start from there, and it would be maybe a trail a little ways, but then you're going up rock. And it depends on the mountain. It's on some days in Mount Rainier, it's a trench. I mean, if they've got, and the way it used to be, I haven't been up there lately, but you'd be following yesterday's trench. If you were on Sunday's climb and Saturday's group had made a trench right to the summit, well, you'd almost be following it to a point, not all the way up, but just depending on how steep the ice was and how often it's traveled. Yeah.
You had a photo of the view from Mount Adams. It was Mount Rainier, but 2 slides before that you had a view of another mountain. It was a pointy mountain. Was that Mount Hood?
Without going back, it was either, you can see certainly Mount St Helens, and that would be it, Mount St Helens or Mount Hood. Mount Hood, yeah.
Yeah, I drove up to the lodge there. It was easier than hiking, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I have talked to people right here in Bellingham, believe it or not. He says, oh, I went up to Mount Rainier. And, oh, yeah, how was it? He says, well, I went all the way to the top. Well, he drove to the top, that was cool. I mean, they've got the lodge and everything, but it's interesting. But any other questions or anything? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know the Mazamas climbed Glacier Peak, I think 1906. And but recently, Cairo TV did a thing on Glacier Peak and saying how dangerous it is, that they're now beginning to monitor it because it's so remote. But they said they're watching it carefully because there's something going on down below.
Yeah. Well, this has caused some discussions fairly recently because at the time we climbed it, it wasn't a volcano at all. You couldn't smell any sulfur like you could most of the other peaks. But in recent time, then all of a sudden, as you say, it's been measured a lot more significantly and accurately than it has in the past. And they've kind of, with their testing techniques, it is volcanic. Yeah.
Between about 1870 and 1910, people dreamed about putting a railroad line through Skagit or Whatcom County at the Cascades. Is there any place where they could have realistically put a railroad line through there?
Through the North Cascades? No.
Yeah.
Not a chance. No, I think all of the early surveyors kind of picked out the Snoqualmie Pass route, and that's what the Northern Pacific uses. And there's no way. The closest would possibly be the North Cascades Highway. And you know what that's like, probably. Yeah, that's not going to be conducive to it. Anything else? Well, thank you. I've enjoyed sharing my slides with you. And, great.